911 location of emergency.
Oh my God! I need somebody out here.
What's going on?
Oh God!
There's 4 people.
In my mama's house, and
Who are these people that are in the house?
it's my mom and my grandma and my granny and my stepdad.
It was a quiet Monday morning in Pendleton, South Carolina. The sun was barely creeping over the trees lining Refuge Road, casting long shadows across the gravel driveways and aging porches of this rural neighborhood. Birds chirped, dogs barked in the distance, and life moved at its usual slow pace until a single frantic call shattered the stillness. It was 38-year-old Amy Vilardi, a woman known in the community for her pet grooming business and polite smile. But that morning, her screams tore through the dispatcher's headset as she claimed to have stumbled upon a nightmare inside her parents' home next door.
Now, it all started here about 12:30 this afternoon. That's when deputies from Anderson County got a call about a possible shooting. When investigators went into the home, they found the victim. Discovery was made today by Cathy Scott's daughter. Now, deputies tell me at this point they don't know how or why this happened, only that they have a lot of investigating to do.
When deputies arrived, the scene inside was unlike anything they had ever encountered. In the living room, kitchen, and back hallway lay the bodies of 4 people: Amy's mother, Cathy Scott, her stepfather, Mike Scott, and their mothers, Violet Taylor and Barbara Scott. All of them had been brutally stabbed and then shot, their bodies crumpled in pools of blood that soaked into the carpet and walls. Investigators described the scene as pure horror, a quiet family home transformed into a slaughterhouse overnight.
Investigators say the killer slashed their throats and shot them dead, and the culprit is still on the loose.
We've followed through with every lead that has come in. We still don't have any witnesses or anyone to confess.
Investigators are telling us they want anyone with information to call the Anderson County Sheriff's Office. You can also report any tips anonymously.
What could drive someone to wipe out an entire family, including 2 elderly women in their 80s who could barely walk? Who had the rage or cold-blooded calculation to plan such an execution? As deputies began their work, Amy and her husband Ross stood outside, arms around each other, crying and shaking as they watched the forensic teams comb through the house that once held Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings.
The stuff you see on TV, that has nothing, that you can't compare that. You can't compare that.
A week after a quadruple murder, a family is still searching for answers.
We used to have family dinners right here.
At first, Amy and Ross were treated as devastated relatives, offering statements to deputies about their last visits with Cathy and Mike. But beneath the sobs and tears, detectives sensed something they couldn't quite put into words. The crime itself was methodical. 4 separate victims attacked with both a knife and a gun, one after the other, each left where they fell. There were no signs of forced entry, ransacking, or hurried escape. Whoever committed this massacre knew the house, knew the routine, and knew exactly where each person would be that night. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the case grew cold. Pendleton residents whispered among themselves, terrified that a killer still roamed free. Billboards went up offering rewards. True crime shows profiled the tragedy, urging anyone with information to come forward. But the Scotts' murders remained an unsolved mystery, buried under layers of grief and small-town silence. Yet behind closed doors, detectives continued their work. They reviewed surveillance footage frame by frame, analyzed financial records, examined shoe prints and blood, and waited for the smallest crack to form. 8 long years would pass before they felt ready to act. 8 years in which Amy and Ross carried on with life, running their business, paying bills, posting online about their days, until December 2023, when the hammer finally fell. Because as investigators alleged, the real horror of this case was not just what happened that Halloween night, it was who they believed was responsible. Not a masked stranger in the shadows, not a random drifter or burglar gone wrong, but the very people who called the victims Mom and Grandma. The Scott family was well known in Pendleton. Cathy Scott, 60, and her husband Mike Scott, 58, had been married for decades. Cathy worked as a caretaker while Mike had spent his life saving and investing carefully. They lived with their mothers, Violet Taylor, 85, and Barbara Scott, 80, in a modest home filled with antiques and framed family photos. Their daughter Amy and her husband Ross Vilardi lived next door in a small trailer. To outsiders, it seemed like an ideal arrangement. Amy could check on her elderly grandmothers daily, and her mother was always nearby for help. But beneath the surface, the Vilardi were struggling. Amy's pet grooming business barely made enough to cover bills. Ross worked sporadically, unable to hold steady employment due to health and discipline issues. They were falling behind on payments, rent, and utilities. Friends recalled Amy complaining about money constantly and hinting that her parents had plenty they never used. In the months leading up to the murders, Cathy had started locking her bedroom and her cash safe. Mike Scott was known to keep tens of thousands of dollars in cash hidden around the house, wrapped in bundles and labeled. Neighbors said Mike didn't trust banks much. His savings were for future care expenses, repairs, and his wife's needs if anything ever happened to him. No one could have imagined that this decision to keep cash hidden would one day become the motive for an unthinkable crime. Halloween night in Pendleton was uneventful. Children trick-or-treated down Refuge Road, and porch lights flickered with carved pumpkins. Cathy and Mike spent the evening quietly at home with their mothers, handing out candy. Amy and Ross reportedly visited briefly, dropping off extra candy bags. Nothing seemed unusual, but sometime after nightfall, horror struck. Investigators believe the killer entered the home calmly, perhaps even welcomed inside. Cathy was found stabbed multiple times and shot once in the back. Mike was stabbed repeatedly and then shot in the chest. Violet and Barbara, frail and unable to flee, were killed execution-style with gunshots to the head. There were no signs of defensive wounds on the elderly women, suggesting they were sitting or lying down, unable to fight back. The killer moved through the house systematically, room to room, ensuring no one survived. Cash was stolen from hiding spots and bundles were missing from Mike's labeled envelopes. The crime was swift, methodical, and deeply personal.
Well, only on Fox here at 6 o'clock, the Anderson County Sheriff is naming 2 persons of interest in an unsolved quadruple homicide in Pendleton. The killings dominated news coverage across the upstate in 2015. And now, almost 8 years later, the sheriff says this couple, Amy and Ross Vilardi, are persons of interest.
From day one, detectives considered Amy and Ross as possible suspects. They were the only people with clear knowledge of the house layout, victim routines, and hidden cash. But there was no direct evidence tying them to the murders. Investigators scoured the scene for fingerprints, DNA, and footprints. Then they found a partial shoe print in blood, consistent with a red Asics sneaker. Ross owned a pair of red Asics. Surveillance footage later showed him wearing them while buying beer on Halloween night. In addition, cell phone records placed him in the area at the time of the murders, despite claims of being home asleep. The most damning evidence, however, came years later. Detectives found over $67,000 in cash, wrapped in bundles identical to Mike Scott's labeling system, hidden at the Vilardi's trailer. Serial numbers match bills missing from the Scotts' home. Amy and Ross had no explanation for why they possessed such large sums when their bank accounts were nearly empty. Despite suspicions, the case remained unsolved until new cold case detectives reopened it in 2023. Using advanced forensic testing, reanalysis of financial records, and re-interviewing witnesses, they built a comprehensive case. On December 14, 2023, authorities arrested Amy and Ross Vilardi, charging them each with 4 counts of murder. It was a cold December morning when the Anderson County Sheriff's Office finally moved in. 8 long years had passed since Halloween night 2015, when the Scott family was slaughtered in their own home, and whispers of who could have committed such a horrific act haunted the quiet streets of Pendleton. But now officers lined Refuge Road, lights flashing against the bare winter trees as they approached the small trailer where Amy and Ross Vilardi lived. Amy was working at her pet grooming business when deputies entered. According to witnesses, she was brushing a golden retriever on the grooming table, humming to herself as she clipped its fur. When officers surrounded her, she reportedly looked confused at first, greeting them with a hesitant smile. Then they told her she was under arrest for the murder of her mother, stepfather, and grandmothers. The clippers fell from her hand onto the table with a loud clatter, and her smile vanished instantly. She backed away, her face twisted in disbelief as she shouted, "What are you talking about?" "No, this can't be happening. I didn't do anything." Deputies handcuffed her in front of stunned customers, leading her out to the squad car as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Please, I didn't do this. I love my mama," she kept repeating, her voice cracking in panic. But the officers remained silent, guiding her into the vehicle as reporters gathered outside, cameras rolling to capture every second of her downfall. At the same time, another team of deputies approached the trailer next door, where Ross was still asleep in bed. They entered swiftly, guns drawn, shouting commands to wake him. Ross sat up groggily, squinting in confusion as deputies ordered him to put his hands behind his head. Unlike Amy, he said nothing. He followed every command mechanically, his face expressionless, as if he had known this day would come. Officers cuffed him and led him outside in his sweatpants and slippers, his head bowed, ignoring the barrage of questions shouted by reporters waiting at the end of the driveway.
Vilardis, of course, are related to the victims. Specifically, Amy Vilardi is the daughter of victim Cathy Scott, and also granddaughter to Violet Taylor. So Ross is Amy's husband, and again, together we have arrested them just a little bit ago at their residence in Columbia, South Carolina.
The arrest sent shockwaves through Pendleton. Residents had lived for years with unease, knowing a killer was free, but few ever believed Amy and Ross were truly responsible. Some neighbors defended them, describing how they hosted summer barbecues, gave out treats on Halloween, and seemed like a normal struggling couple. Others whispered that Amy always seemed desperate for money, often asking neighbors for small loans she never repaid. In the days following their arrest, prosecutors held a press conference revealing the evidence gathered over nearly a decade. They described how detectives found large sums of cash hidden in the Vilardi's trailer, wrapped in the same labeled bundles as Mike Scott's missing money. They presented photos of Ross wearing his red Asics sneakers on Halloween night, the same shoes linked to bloody prints found in the victim's home. They revealed phone records placing him near the crime scene at the time of the murders, despite his earlier alibi that he had been asleep. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation was the motive prosecutors described. They argued that Amy, facing mounting debts and business failure, saw her parents' cash reserves as the solution to all her problems. She knew where the money was hidden and when her parents would be home. They painted Ross as the executioner, using his knowledge of combat-style knife attacks to inflict lethal wounds quickly before shooting each victim to ensure death. Prosecutors described it as a premeditated, cold-blooded slaughter committed out of sheer greed.
Just to be clear, I think it is the state's belief that Ms. Vilardi is the mastermind of this situation. The one person who stood to truly benefit from their death was Amy Vilardi. She quickly cleaned up the residence where the murders took place, where the 4 bodies had been for well over 24 hours.
When Amy and Ross appeared in court for their bond hearing, the room was packed with reporters, family members, and curious residents. Amy sobbed uncontrollably as her charges were read aloud. Ross remained silent, staring straight ahead with deadened eyes. The victims' family members gave emotional statements, begging the judge to deny bond. "They murdered 4 innocent people who loved them," Cathy's sister cried, her voice shaking. "They don't deserve to ever walk free again."
All new at 10, bond denied for a couple charged with murder in connection to a quadruple homicide from 2015. This hearing happening today at the Anderson County Courthouse. The suspects, Amy Vilardi and her husband Ross, are charged with 4 counts of murder. This case is one that really rocked the Anderson community. Days after Halloween in 2015, Cathy and Mike Scott, Barbara Scott, and Violet Taylor. They were all found stabbed and shot to death in a home that they shared on Refuge Road in Pendleton. Investigators described this as a gruesome and devastating scene. Now, the sheriff tells us that they've suspected the Vilardis for several years, but he cannot provide any further details on that evidence they have against them or possible motive. He said that would all be coming out in court. However, he is confident that they're one step closer to justice. We've interviewed the Vilardis several times over the last few years. The first time we actually interviewed Amy, and that was just one day after the bodies were found. When we talked with her in 2016, we asked her who she thought may have killed her family members, and this was her response.
I mean, I don't see how anybody could want to. I really don't.
Both the Vilardis live on the same property as the victims, again, just steps away from the home where the bodies were found.
I wish that the families weren't having to deal with this, but I hope this is a good day for them, at least the first step of getting justice.
Again, more details on this case will be revealed in the trial. That date has not yet been set, but they are partnering with the state's Attorney General's office to prosecute this case.
The judge agreed, denying bond for both Amy and Ross, citing the brutality of the crime, the risk of flight, and the devastating impact on surviving family members. But for investigators, the evidence told a different story, one of betrayal, greed, and a cold plan executed by the very people the victims trusted most. With bond denied and the arrest complete, attention shifted to what would become one of South Carolina's most closely watched murder trials in years. Prosecutors began preparing their case with meticulous detail, knowing that convicting Amy and Ross would require weaving a narrative that convinced jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. In pretrial motions, the prosecution laid out its strategy. They would show financial records proving Amy and Ross were deeply in debt, owing thousands on credit cards, vehicle payments, and utility bills. They would present testimony from friends and neighbors who heard Amy complain that her parents had all this money sitting around while we're drowning. They planned to use forensic experts to explain how the shoe prints in blood matched Ross's red Asics sneakers and how phone tower data placed him at the Scotts' home that night. Prosecutors also hinted at introducing jail phone calls made by Amy after her arrest. In one recording, she told Ross, "They don't have anything solid, just stay quiet like we planned." In another call, she broke down sobbing, "I just wanted to fix everything. This wasn't supposed to happen like this." Defense attorneys filed motions to exclude these calls from trial, arguing they were taken out of context and violated her privacy. They also moved to suppress the cash evidence, claiming it was a gift Cathy Scott gave Amy before her death. They can't prove when she gave it to her, Amy's attorney argued. That cash wasn't stolen, it was inherited. Meanwhile, Ross's defense focused on his alleged innocence, arguing that his shoe print was not a full match and that wearing similar shoes was common. His attorney described Ross as a quiet man with no violent history, no criminal record, and no motive to kill the only family he had. The community watched anxiously as both sides built their cases. News stations ran daily updates, interviewing legal experts who speculated on whether prosecutors could prove their theory of Amy as the mastermind and Ross as the executioner. Many believed the circumstantial evidence was strong, but others feared it might not be enough without direct DNA or eyewitness testimony. As jury selection neared, the judge ruled the trial would remain in Anderson County despite defense concerns about pretrial publicity tainting the jury pool. Prosecutors promised to pursue life without parole for both defendants, citing the aggravating circumstances of multiple murders, financial motive, and the vulnerability of elderly victims. Family members prepared impact statements, hoping to finally see justice for their loved ones.
We have been immensely impacted, both emotionally and physically, for the past 8 years. This impact stretches not only to the family, but to friends and the community as a whole. Our lives are forever altered from this brutal crime. Everything was taken from us that day, and we've had to continue with little answers. I lost my best friend, my only sibling, Mike, and my mother. I've had to navigate a whole new normal without them, and I continue to struggle with this daily. Amy does not deserve freedom and should be considered a flight risk. We, the family, the friends, and the community request bond be denied today and at any time in the future.
The trial is expected to begin later this year, promising emotional testimony, shocking revelations, and an unflinching look into how greed can twist love into something deadly. For the people of Pendleton, it will be a moment to finally hear every detail of what happened on Halloween night 2015, and to decide if Amy and Ross Vilardi are truly guilty of the unthinkable crime that destroyed an entire family. The aftermath of the Vilardi arrest left Pendleton in a state of uneasy reflection. For 8 years, this small rural community had lived under the shadow of an unsolved quadruple homicide, fearing that a ruthless killer was still among them. When the truth emerged that the alleged murderers were the victim's own daughter and son-in-law, grief transformed into horror. Neighbors spoke to reporters about how they felt betrayed. "We trusted them. Amy would come over crying about how much she missed her mama, and we'd comfort her. Knowing now what she's accused of doing, it makes my stomach turn."
With the daughter got angry with her and kept the children from Cathy.
So tell us about that.
It seemed that they really tried to help Amy a lot. And Mike and Cathy, they really took care of the kids. And it broke Cathy and Mike's heart. She just really missed the kids, and the two older ladies that lived there, they were used to the kids coming in and out.
You think Cathy was afraid at all of Amy and Ross?
No, she never expressed that. But it was always the talk of the area.
The Scott home, once filled with the smell of Cathy's home-cooked meals and Mike's laughter echoing through the halls, remained boarded up. Overgrown grass covered the yard, and wind whistled through broken window panes. It became a grim reminder of how greed and desperation could destroy everything in its path. Some neighbors called it cursed, refusing to walk near it at night. Family members tried to pick up the pieces. Cathy and Mike's surviving relatives spent months sorting through their belongings, donating furniture to charity, and disposing of blood-stained carpets and walls. "It felt like burying them all over again," one cousin said tearfully. Every room told the story of their last moments. The community gathered for a memorial vigil after the arrests, holding candles in the darkness outside the Scott home. A pastor prayed for justice and healing, but also for Amy and Ross's children, who now face the unbearable reality that their parents might spend the rest of their lives behind bars for murdering their own family. "Those kids are innocent victims too," the pastor said. "They will carry this burden forever." As the trial looms ahead, one question echoes louder than all others. How could a daughter look her own mother in the eyes and plan her brutal death? How could a son-in-law stand over his elderly grandmothers-in-law, defenseless and frail, and end their lives with cold efficiency? These are the questions that haunt not just the courtroom, but an entire community that once believed the Vilardi were nothing more than a struggling couple fighting to make ends meet. Pendleton has always been a town of front porch waves and shared casseroles, where neighbors check on each other during storms and people still gather for Sunday service. For years, residents grieved the horrific murders of Cathy and Mike Scott and their mothers, praying for answers and safety. They planted flowers outside the Scott home, placed wreaths on the porch, and whispered silent prayers as they passed by on their way to work or school. When Amy and Ross were arrested in December 2023, shock rippled through every street. People who once offered them charity and comfort now avoided their names, feeling betrayed in the deepest way possible. "It's like your worst nightmare," a neighbor told reporters, "to find out the killer wasn't a stranger in the woods or a masked intruder, but family, blood." As the legal process moves forward, prosecutors remain confident in their case. They plan to show jurors a timeline pieced together over 8 painstaking years. Financial debts mounting in the Vilardi household, Amy's increasingly desperate pleas for help, and Ross's silent compliance as the alleged muscle behind the plan. They believe Amy orchestrated the crime with a mind fixed solely on the cash she knew was hidden within her parents' home. They say Ross carried out the murders with calculated precision, ensuring no witness remained alive. Yet their defense teams maintain innocence. They argue that the cash was a gift from Cathy before her death, that the shoe print evidence is inconclusive, and that neither Amy nor Ross had the mental capacity or violent nature to execute such a calculated massacre. They insist that investigators built their theory backward, driven by community pressure and the fear of an unsolved mass murder tainting Pendleton's reputation. For Amy and Ross's children, the tragedy cuts deeper than anyone else can imagine. They've lost their grandparents and great-grandmothers, and now they may lose both parents to life sentences in prison. Community members have come together to support them, raising funds to ensure they can continue schooling, therapy, and daily life away from the darkness of what happened. As the final court dates approach, Pendleton waits with bated breath for answers to questions that may never be fully understood. What drives a daughter to turn against her own blood? Was it desperation, greed, or a mind consumed by darkness no one else could see? Did Ross act out of loyalty, fear, or his own selfish desire for the stolen money? Or is there still a piece of this puzzle missing, a truth yet to be revealed that will change everything once again? These questions remain suspended in the humid South Carolina air, drifting through Refuge Road like a ghost that refuses to leave. Because the real horror of the Amy Vilardi case isn't just the night 4 innocent lives were brutally ended. It's the reality that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hold the sharpest knives. And when that betrayal comes, there are no warning signs, only silence, darkness, and the cold echo of screams that never fade.